Everyone, so welcome back, and yes, my name's Liam Dowd, I'm the Managing Director at Ethical Corporation, and yes, it's great that you can join us over these 2 days. In the research for this summit, Candy alluded to yesterday in our intro, we're seeing increasing pressure on companies to really address some of the social and environmental risks in their supply chain, but as we're hearing, as we heard yesterday, for a number of the sessions, these risks present and these challenges present great opportunities for companies to distinguish themselves and make sure they're fit for what's ahead. Some of the sessions looked at how you can deploy renewables within your supply chain and how you can obviously add that capacity to your suppliers, give them the information, give them the resources. We also had a session that looked at going beyond audits as increasing expectation for companies to go beyond audits, really address the issue at its source. But obviously that requires support, it requires information, and it requires probably input from others as well. And that was, I suppose, a recurring theme that I heard both in this room and next door. This requires everyone coming together and working together. I heard at an event earlier this year, we should work together to save the world. We shouldn't be competing to save the world. We know in 5-10 years' time, business has to change. It's not sustainable how we are right now. So in a sustainable world, the irresponsible, unsustainable companies, they don't have a place. So you guys, you get it. You're here, and we've got some great panel ahead of us to kick off today's proceedings around a very hot topic around plastics. So, some people call it the Attenborough effect in the UK, and it's both sides of the Atlantic, or we speak to people in the US, and companies are wrestling with the plastic problem, so to say. So I won't eat into too much time because I know there's a great three great panelists and a great moderator who's got some really interesting ideas to present to you, and we want you to bring your ideas in too. So please raise your hand, make it interactive, share your ideas, and also some of your critiques or some of the challenges you can see in the paths that are being laid ahead. We want to hear your ideas, and we want to make sure you get the most out of it. So enjoy the next 2 days. And final thing from me, our team, the Ethical Corp team, is we're passionate about helping you in achieving the impacts you want to make. So do grab us across the rest of today and let us know your thoughts on how we can help you better, how we can improve in what we do and what we should be looking to tackle in 2019. Your thoughts will help make sure that we're steer and we are in line with what you hope for and expect. So yes, enjoy today. Make sure it's lively and get your questions answered. So I'd like to now hand over to Jane to get the first session underway.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jane Beavis. I chair the Unpack recycling label, which is a very small not-for-profit that has a big impact through our members, over 600 brands putting our recycling labels on their packaging. Very happy to be here this morning. On my way through Vauxhall bus station, there was a guy with a T-shirt that said, "Where the hell is Friday?" If you're feeling like that, we've got the panel that will rejuvenate you, and you'll be glad it's Thursday. So just to put this debate in context, because of course every decision we make has an impact on everything else that we touch. So in the context of the discussions that have been going on over the last day or so here, a future-fit supply chain that takes account of the drive on cost savings, reducing climate impacts, and minimizing social risks. Let's just think about how our decisions on plastics in packaging fits within this. Well, undoubtedly, we are still operating within a fiercely competitive world. How to get the collaboration within that competitive context. Suggestions that the potential trade wars between the US and China could result in a slowdown of 0.3% economic growth in both of those economies. Brexit maybe taking 1 to 2% off the growth here in the UK. So far a hit of £24 billion to the UK economy. All of that impacts on people's wage packets and pension payments. So what are they going to be spending on? How are they going to spend their money? Emerging players from other markets. You probably heard of Alibaba and Air China, but you might not yet have heard of Haier, Alex, Anker, Xiaomi, Cheetah Mobile. They're all going to be competing for business globally, not just within the Chinese market. And the disruptive business models that are already well advanced here, we've seen the problems that House of Fraser have had. Debenhams also reported to be having difficulties. John Lewis Partnership saying they didn't make any profit in the first half of this year. So those businesses have real challenges to face up to. Does that mean they've got extra money to spend on packaging if the alternative to plastic is different? Maybe not. Reducing climate impacts. This week of all weeks, we have been reminded of the importance of this. Oceans are already suffering from elevated acidity and lower levels of oxygen. What's going to kill the fish first? The plastic waste or what we're doing in terms of carbon dioxide emissions? And at the current level of commitments, the world's on course for a disastrous 3 degrees C warming. How do we handle all of that within the context of plastics, which can have a lower environmental impact than other packaging materials? And the social risks. 821 million people now hungry and 150 million children stunted, according to the World Health Organization. Hunger on the rise, back to the level it was at the beginning of this century. Often due to climate variability, conflict and economic slowdown, but food waste is also crucial. 500,000 children in the UK go to school hungry without a meal each day, and 3 million are hungry in the holidays when they're not getting their free school lunches. 1/3 of the food produced globally is lost or wasted instead of eaten. 1.3 billion tonnes, equivalent to half of the global cereals crop, and 10 million tonnes of food wasted in the UK, half of which could have been eaten. So, plastics play a very important part in our lives. We all know the statistics of what happens when it escapes from where it should be. We'll hear from some of our speakers today about the huge growth that's coming our way. But let's just remember, 40% of plastics in Europe, at least, go into packaging. 20% are in building and construction, 10% in the automotive industry. The rest accounted for by electricals and electronics, household leisure and sports, agriculture, furniture, medical uses, and of course in our clothes. So it's everywhere. We've got some amazing speakers this morning from consumer brands, or John tells me carpet isn't really a consumer good, but I guess we consume carpet. It's more slowly than we consume Coke, perhaps. But so Joe Francis from Coca-Cola European Partners, John Koo from Interface, and hopefully, if he arrives off the plane, Tom Doman from Ecova Method. From Greenpeace to hear the environmental impacts of not just what's happening, but the choices that are in front of us, we have Melissa Wang. And from those who are within the supply chain supporting those brands, we have Risto Vapola and myself speaking. The way we're going to handle this is Joe is going to set us up to talk about the journey that Coca-Cola has been on over the last decade or so, I guess, Joe, where this isn't just a recent occurrence. This is something that a lot of brands have been thinking about for quite some time. And then we're going to go into 10 minutes each from our experts so that we can have a nice long session together on questions and answers from questions from yourselves. So this is very much your debate, but we hope that our speakers will provoke some thoughts with you. So I'm very pleased to introduce Joe to start us off.
Thank you so much, Jane. And listening to your comments, I probably do want my Where is Friday t-shirt. But, you know, one of the things I'm going to say a little bit about is why I do remain optimistic. I was in Oslo yesterday at a very similar conference to this, probably Oslo's equivalent, although it was focused very much on food and drink. And I am also going to be in Amsterdam next week, having a very similar conversation. And the reason I mentioned both of those is because I think it's absolutely critical that the dialogue and the discussion and the Q&A continues to flow on this, because it's only by gaining that kind of insight, having those discussions, that we get to the kind of solutions that we collectively need. So I'm going to say a little bit about this morning about some of the interventions that we've made. Hopefully some of you have followed what we've done. Hopefully some of you think we've been doing some of the right things. Some of you undoubtedly will be expecting something a little bit different, and that's exactly why I'm here, ready to listen. So I really welcome the dialogue. I guess unsurprisingly, which way am I pointing? Clicking. There you go. So unsurprisingly, our fundamental starting point on packaging is that it fulfills a core function for our business. So it's about quality, it's about safety. You all know that we use a variety of packaging. We use glass, we use plastic, we use aluminium. Plastic bottles account for about 30% of our packaging mix in Western Europe. And we use packaging when we need a lightweight and a resealable packaging solution. But of course, and I've gone one step too far in my slides already, it's very sensitive. So we've seen the Greenpeace report this week. We've seen, and if you haven't seen it, I'd urge you to read it. I'd urge you to read as well WWF's recent report on the MED, both of which highlight, not that we didn't know it, but highlight the problems that the world has in terms of packaging. We know that too much packaging is ending up where it shouldn't. As litter, and I walked from my house to the tube this morning, and I counted probably a dozen at least cans and more bottles. So we know that packaging is ending up where it shouldn't. And we also know that we've all, including Coca-Cola, have got a responsibility to fix the problem. We also know that it's urgent. And that really critically means engaging with the discussion, as Jane started, around different types of plastic, around different types of single-use plastic, and making a really important distinction between unnecessary and problematic single-use plastic items which cannot be collected and cannot be recycled, and then plastic bottles, which we know are 100% recyclable, already widely collected, and, if we get it right, can be recycled in a closed-loop, bottle-to-bottle circular system. Now, to do that for all of our bottles, that's where the vision piece comes in, ensuring that none of them end up as litter, none of them end up in the oceans. That is the truly future-fit supply chain, and a valuable supply chain that we want to get to.
It's the middle one that comes straight out.
Because they're from France, where a number of different brands have come together to highlight the value of plastic in a circular fashion. So this is about saying that a Fanta bottle can become a Coke, and on the other side, a bottle of Pepsi can become a 7-Up. And it's about brands coming together to show the value of bottle-to-bottle recycling. But we're also the first to recognize the distance to travel to achieve this in all of our markets in Western Europe. I always love joining the Ethical Corp event because it really does bring probably the brightest and best in sustainability. And I always include one slide around sustainability plans. I'm not going to go into this in any detail because you can find it all online. At Coke, we've listened really carefully to what people want. We've listened very carefully to everyone outside of our industry, experts in terms of plastic recycling, recovery. We've got our Global World Without Waste vision in Western Europe. We've got our This Is Forward plan, and we've specifically chosen those words because we know that there is only one way, and that's to look ahead, and that's the optimism piece. And we have to continue to ensure that we change our business and make sure that we are operating in a responsible and sustainable way. And on plastic, that means looking at 5 areas of investment, and they're summarized behind me. I'm going to say a little bit about some of those. So if I focus on our goal to get everything back, this 100% collection, this getting back a bottle or a can for every single one we sell, we know just how huge and ambitious that target is. We know how challenging it is. And it means developing a really deep understanding of both collection rates and recycling rates in every single one of our markets. And anyone who's expert at that knows that that's actually in itself not an easy job to do. For us, it means understanding. It means supporting policy options that we may not have supported in the past, like well-managed deposit return schemes where we're supporting in Great Britain and Scotland. It means investing in reverse vending technology. We've not done that before, so we've trialed that with Merlin this summer. One of the things I was doing in Oslo was looking at how their deposit return scheme works. Probably the shining example in Europe, getting recovery rates in excess of 97% back. It means investing in partnerships like the Leads by Example, on-the-go recycling initiative that's launched this week. And it means getting plastic back into this, into high-quality bales, ready for recycling, able to deliver quality, high yield, and able to go back bottle to bottle. So we're convinced that that's the right target to have. We know that it's a challenge, but we're absolutely confident that if we were to get close to that Norway recovery rate in countries like England and Scotland, then we will help to fix the fragile economics that really have plagued the recycling and reprocessing and material reuse supply chains in Great Britain for so long. We're backing our investment with a lot of time and focus on recycled PET. So we've seen a multi-year investment to double the amount of recycled PET we use. Currently about a quarter of all the PET we buy is recycled PET. We're going to double that to half. And that means spreading recycled PET across all of our bottles, 50+ manufacturing sites in Western Europe, across all of our brands. And yes, you know, we could put it all into one facility and one brand if we got the highest quality feedstock. But we don't believe that's the right approach. We've done that before. We've tried it. So what we're trying to do is upscale and invest in rPET supply chains by supporting businesses like Cleantech in Great Britain, by entering into joint ventures in France with the likes of Plastipack, where we are doubling the capacity of PET reprocessing in France. It also means getting recyclability right. And that means making sure that every sleeve, label, cap that we put and we use does not hinder the recyclability of our PET bottles. And it also means using our marketing assets and our core brands. When we listen to what our external stakeholders said to us, they said, look, you're Coca-Cola. You advertise regularly. You've got significant communication power through your brands. And it means launching integrated marketing campaigns like this one. I'm not going to show it today. You can find it online. It's a brand Coke ad that is all about encouraging people to recycle. It means supporting our above the line with Unpack and on closure clear recycling messaging. It means supporting the kind of app that Jane might refer to later, which is a new online app which easily communicates to anybody if their pack is recyclable and if it isn't, and where you can recycle it. And it means doing different work on social media. Some of you may have seen our Coke Dunks social media campaign recently. So it means trying different things. It means communicating as much as we can to make sure that people don't drop litter and do use those readily available recycling and collection systems that exist. It also means thinking about innovation. So we've got a really strong track record, we believe, around innovation. So we were the first company to trial and test recycled PET in plastic bottles. I remember personally looking at that trial, sitting there looking at 10, 20, 25% rPET in a bottle and taking it to our marketeers and them thinking it was incredibly cloudy and not wanting to use it. We're in a completely different place now. Technology has moved on. That was a decade ago. We've pioneered the use of plant bottle material, so renewable material in our bottles. And we're continuing to look really closely at where technology will help. I know some of the other speakers will probably refer to chemical recycling, which moves the recycling industry on towards complete depolymerization. And can that help us to move recycled PET percentages up even further and make it much easier to capture the value that is inherent in PET packaging? And it also means looking at packaging innovations like alternatives to plastic. So this is a picture from our Reading University Freestyle trial. Allows us to deliver drinks via RFID-enabled reusable plastic containers. We've trialed that at Reading, we've trialed it at music festivals this summer, and we're going to widen that trial. But you know, fundamentally, and I do think that the IPCC report this week has and really should redouble all of our efforts in terms of not just packaging, but climate change, the sustainability agenda as a whole. We're absolutely convinced that partnerships are key. We know that we can't act alone. We know that we don't have all the answers. And that's why I really welcome the opportunity to be in Oslo, to be here, to be in Amsterdam, having this kind of conversation. It means supporting things like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's New Plastic Economy Initiative. It means being a solid, firm, active player in the UK Plastics Pact. It means at a global level supporting the World Economic Forum's Global Plastic Action Partnership, which will begin to help struggling economies, developing countries, first stop Indonesia, who are really struggling with waste infrastructure. They don't have the kind of waste infrastructure that certainly we do in the UK. And so that's why I view this whole thing, this whole lens, as a lens of opportunity. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation puts a €700 million opportunity, not a price tag, an opportunity on the circular economy. And that's just for FMCG in material cost savings alone. But I'm also very clear that to be successful, not just on this, but on the wider sustainability agenda. I know there's another conference next door talking about a broader agenda, about reporting, about disclosure. We are all going to have to do more, think differently, and invest in solutions that we probably haven't invested in the past. So Jane, maybe I'll leave it there. And I'm happy to take questions, I guess, later on in the session.
Thank you very much, Joe. So that's one company's overall view of the strategy towards moving forward on this. And as you can see, a lot of work that's happened over the years to do that. So we're now going to look at individual aspects within an overall approach to focusing on plastic packaging reduction, recycle, and replacing. And we're going to start by looking at closing the loop on plastic waste. And Risto is going to talk to us about chemical recycling. Do you want?
Okay, I can start here. So yeah, I'm Risto Paapala from Neste, based in Finland, working for Neste is, I don't know how many of you knows what we are doing, but we are a traditional oil refining company from the beginning. But then, of course, actually, we have been transforming ourselves very much from just a crude oil refining company to produce from biomass renewable products for the marketplace, like road traffic fuels and also feedstock for the petrochemical industry. And with that perspective also to have possibilities to replace crude oil, let's say fossil waste materials in chemicals and plastics. And if you now look on on how we are operating and on how we see the work, let's say, word regarding, especially now with the debate, what is going on around waste plastics. We see there a real, let's say, possibility for our position in the value chain. Having this background coming from utilizing bio-based waste and residues in our process to also to expand that to utilize and recover waste plastic based feedstock as a feedstock into our refineries. And in that way, closing partly the loop back to chemicals and polymers, for example. And actually, the ambition for us, of course, is that regarding the waste plastics and to take it back to the loop, it means that, as you know, today, basically the alternatives you have for utilizing the waste plastics is basically, okay, you can reuse it as such, for example, in some applications. Besides that, okay, you can mechanically recycle that, or basically then, as a final step, incinerate it. Okay, landfill will be banned, at least in Europe, and I don't see that an option in the future. But then, of course, our ambition is because the chemical recycling is actually something that is not really existing in any bigger scale, and we see there to really bring up the recycling rates in the future, to also to have this alternative really in big scale. And we are working with the value chain partners, especially upstreams, to really have these waste streams available for our business and in our processes, and then further down to new virgin plastics, for example. And the ambition is that we see that by 2030 we could utilize and replace fossil feedstock in our refineries with about at least 1 million ton of waste plastics coming back as a liquefied feedstock into our processes. And the products, basically what we are making in the petrochemical industry, of course, today from crude oil and refining that, it's landing on different products, okay, fuels and so on, chemicals, plastics, and for today's discussion, I would say that we would focus on the chemicals and plastic streams from what we are aiming at. And as I said, of course, the value chain needs to really be built up, so that will be a challenge because also the technologies there needs to be developed further, and also to bring it, having the right partners involved, and also the brand owners, and also the regulation, legislation part needs also to be developed further. And here, just last slide from my side is that, okay, we see that anyway, to tackle this waste plastic issue is that we need to recycle more, and it means that we need all kind of alternatives to really to be able to have the or increase the recycling rates, and we see that we can bring in the chemical recycling part to this picture. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Risto. So that's given us a view of a flow through into recycling that perhaps we don't tend to think about so much. We tend to concentrate on the physical side of recycling. John from Interface is now going to talk to us about effectively how you re-engineered your whole processes to embed that within the way you do business.
Thank you, Jane, and good morning, everybody. I'm John Koo from Interface. We are a manufacturer of flooring. Traditionally, we're known for carpet tile. We're the world's largest manufacturer of commercial carpet tile. But in recent years, we've been extending our influence into luxury vinyl tile, and recently we acquired a rubber flooring company called Nora. It's very exciting because it's an ability to extend our sphere of influence as a sustainable company into new forms of flooring. When it comes to the packaging debate and plastics, you might be wondering why are carpet tile companies here talking to you. But I do believe there's some very valuable lessons from our experience that can be learned and can be shared. So we've been committed to closing the loop since 1994. Some of you may know our late founder, Ray Anderson. He committed us to what we call Mission Zero, which is our mission as a company to have no negative impact on the planet by 2020, that favourite year of sustainability pledges. And we're on track. And one aspect of that is that I can say that now 58% of everything we use in our raw materials is recycled or bio-based. That we, as a company, have moved from a take, make, waste position in the 1990s to one where we're willing to start with forms of waste, incorporate them into our products, make something that's beautiful, functional, and useful, and then ensure that it's been designed for disassembly. So at the end of its life, we can take it back and we can use it, repurpose it, or recycle it. Now, on that journey, our suppliers have been key because the reality is, although we make stuff, but the majority of our impact is in our raw materials. So what we do with our little bit of making and selling is good, but if we don't engage our supply chain, if we don't work further up and down the chain, it's kind of, we're not using our sphere of influence quite right. There's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. When we talk about closing the loop, I think that's a really valid phrase. Now, I'll give two examples for this discussion. Number one is our relationship with our yarn provider, Aquafil. 2/3 of our impact is in our raw materials, and within that 2/3 of our impact is in the yarn. And we've been working for the last 20 years with Aquafil to make the soft part of our carpet tile. As a customer, we had the ability to say, we want to be a sustainable company. We want to buy sustainable materials. We're going to challenge yourself, Aquafil, and we're going to challenge our other yarn suppliers to increase the amount of recycled content in your products. And I think what was interesting for Aquafil is they really saw what we were trying to do as a sustainability mission. They understood our values, but they also saw the business opportunity. And they invested in a plant which is in Slovenia, which is one of the very few places in the world where you can take waste fishing nets, other forms of waste nylon, from the car industry, from our own offcuts, even from the clothing industry, and turn it into a material called Econyl, which is 100% from recycled sources. It is, as a material, as functional as a virgin material. And I think that's a key aspect to our discussion. We can't have our flooring falling apart by using a material that wasn't quite so good. Now, how that happened was making sure that at a leadership level, there was a sharing of values, that the sustainability journeys of the two companies were intertwined, and that we kept pressure on each other. And by having such a good relationship, that allowed us to, in recent years, work on a project called Networks. And that's Interface, Aquafil, and the Zoological Society of London. It sees us working in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Cameroon to collect waste fishing nets from artisanal fishing communities that we can turn, with Aquafil's help, into yarn for our carpet, but that can actually provide access to finance for these communities, waste collection in areas where there is no mainstream waste setup. And even more interestingly, it's allowed those communities to invest in seaweed farming, which might lead to potential bioplastics, or it might lead to them selling to the food industry. On that final point, it's interesting the systemic approach that needs to be taken with supply chains and plastics in this area. As a final point, I wanted to talk about a collaboration called Next Wave. So on the back of Networks, we got a good reputation in tackling marine plastics, and we were invited by Dell and an NGO called Lonely Whale to join a collection of other companies, which includes Boreo skateboards, Trek bicycle, General Motors, Herman Miller, Human Scale, who are furniture manufacturers, and Vanderson, to really see if we could scale and create a supply chain for ocean-bound plastic to ensure that plastic is kept in our economy and doesn't end up in the ocean. And again, it's another example of the power of collaboration. You've got people who've got skin in the game in relation to ocean plastics. Dell had used HDPE for the packaging of their XPS 13. We were using fishing nets in our carpet tiles since 2011. Boreo, a very plucky little startup company, was sourcing nets from Chile and turning it into skateboards and sunglasses. And it's allowed us to come together and share best practice and bring other companies such as Herman Miller and General Motors along. And I think a really important part of this solution is cross-industry collaboration. Now, where has that led? Well, what's the next wave led to? Well, for example, with Boreo, with the skateboards, that material is now being used by Human Scale, a furniture manufacturer. In addition, there's some prototypes going on with the other companies about using that material and our material too. And where we want to get to here is that if a piece of waste is found in the Philippines or Indonesia, let's get to a position where we can have 3 or 4 different destinations. One of my frustrations and fears is vanity projects in plastics, where a company's just looking at its supply chain and working out what it can do. From the talk earlier, it's much more exciting when you can have companies come together, form a working group, and create what I would see as a supply web instead of just an up and down supply chain, to make sure that any form of plastic waste has 3 or 4 destinations where it can end up. Thank you very much. Just a few thoughts to provoke the conversation.
Thank you. So we've heard from Risto and John about how we change the actual supply chains, and we look at re-engineering that part of the process. We're now going to hear from Melissa Wang from Greenpeace International, really focusing on how we actually reduce the amount of packaging and how we engage more widely. We've heard a lot about partnership and collaboration within industry. Well, we have customers, and that's where plastic gets out of the corporate ownership chain, if you like, and into the hands of every single one of us in our daily lives. Melissa.
Thank you, Jane. Just don't know where I should start. Thank you for your introduction. And we have seen a lot of plastic problems. The plastic waste, be it in the ocean or on land, be it large or micro level, is an inconvenient truth. But luckily, awareness has been raising and explorations of solutions have been underway, leading to certain level of hope. So let's hopefully get it right. The value chain of plastics is very complicated. This is just a very simplified version of it. You might know much better than me from an industry perspective. But even in this simplified version, it's complicated enough. And that's why a holistic, systematic, and transformative approach is needed to addressing this urgent global issue. And solutions at different life stages of this value chain are needed. As some of our peer panelists have been suggesting from their own experience and expertise. So my take-home message today is the reduction. It's not only the reduction of waste generation, but more upstream, the reduction of plastic production and consumption. This is pivotal, prerequisite, urgent, and possible. And I will go through my quick presentation addressing 3 questions: why, which, and how. Why? Let the data speak for themselves. On the screen, you can see the accumulated volume of plastic waste that have been generated and discarded since the commercialization of production of plastics. So at this current level, we've already known how big the problem is. Let's imagine in about 1 generation's time, the total plastic production volume will be 4 times of current level, while the total volume of waste, plastic waste being generated will be 5 times of the current level. And the total volume of plastic waste being discarded will be 2.5 times of current value. This is already under optimum prediction of a very fast picking up of recycling and incineration. So if without reduction at the source, the problem will only get worse. This challenge has been recognized by UNEA, UN Environment Assembly, the world's highest level of decision-making body on environment issues, in its third session late last year. And that is why in the UN Environment Global Environment Facility report on plastics and the circular economy, it recognized that closing the material loop through the circular economy is important, but slow the material loop will be a cornerstone. To put it simple, recycling and circular economy, if designed and implemented properly, it will have an important role to play in addressing this problem. But we just cannot simply recycle our way out. One of the largest plastic market is packaging, as we have heard from our previous presenters. And because of its very short lifetime compared to all the other plastic products, its percentage in plastic waste is even higher. And I have just watched a BBC documentary like 2-3 days ago. It's the Drowning in Plastic. As said, the food packaging makes up over 1/3 of all plastic waste in the ocean. And I think that is why our panel have been focusing on addressing this packaging issue. The last question is how? How can we address this problem? I think this requires collaboration among all different stakeholders. And we believe that there's an important and crucial role for business to play and a core responsibility for them to take. We need timely commitments and concrete actions to make sure all single-use plastics are under the regulation of extended producer responsibility. We hope the packaging could be simplified for easier recycling, and we hope some fake solutions could be avoided, like bioplastics. At the same time, business should help the policy decision makers to enhance and tightening relevant policies, for example, on reduction targets on national, regional, and international level, to set up a combination of ban, charge, and tax, and to address chemicals used in plastic production and how to address plastic waste contaminated by hazardous chemicals that could possibly be used in circular economy. There was once a huge scandal of children's toy being contaminated from polluted recycled plastics. This should never have happened. So let's make sure for the recycled plastic waste is safe for use in a benign circular economy. At the same time, I think business has an insight to provide to the decision makers how to provide incentives to make the transition as a business opportunity rather than a threat. how to set up this kind of enabling environment for the innovation. I think the private sector should know much better than either NGOs or government officials. And lastly, we believe business should enable and empower alternative options to their customers, for example, the refill. And we should make it global so that there's a leveling playing field for all industries around the world. Countries could learn from each other, and not any single country will need to rely on other countries to take their plastic waste. So innovation could include technology innovation, society innovation, and business model innovation. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, and we know companies are sitting on different level of the value chain with different sizes, different products, different business models. So we cannot just provide just one solution for all business. But some of the existing trials or implementations might provide some inspirations for us. Like in the UK, I have been told by my British colleague who works on that, the Riverford organic farmers started to collect back their packaging boxes in order to reduce the consumption. And Iceland has announced the plastic-free by 2023. For the delivery industry, I'm quite looking forward to the delivery panel later. It's a similar case in China at the moment, but you can imagine because of our huge population, the total volume of plastic being used and waste generated are much, much larger. And I don't know how many people here know this guy. Could you please raise your hand if you know him? So thank you. So he might be one of the most famous person, or at least businessman in China. And Jane has mentioned about Alibaba earlier in her introduction. And he said very recently regarding this plastic issue that in the future of express delivery industry, if you go fast and express, you won't lose, but you will only win with green. So I think this is partly answering Jane's question. Do they have the money or intention to invest in plastic reduction in their business model? And another big business using a lot of plastic packaging in China or in East Asia is food takeaway. We like takeaways. We have a lot of good apps that we can order whatever food you like. And for some of the Deliveroo equivalent business in China, they've already started to try different ways, different materials to deliver the food and how to take them back and how to reuse them. So I think though some of them are at a very early trial stage, but there's more innovations that we would expect in the future, and that requires innovative efforts from every one of us. And to summarize, one of the presenters yesterday impressed me a lot. And he said something quite similar as what Joe just said. He said nobody would be happy if he or she is told to change their business models. This is human nature. But we should innovate and invest for future success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Now, can I just check if Tom has arrived with us? In which case, you might have to have me before Tom, and we hope he joins us before the end of the session. So we've talked about how we change the supply chain, how we have different models. We recapture plastics in different ways. Melissa's now talked about the great need to reduce plastic, but also to engage consumers in a different way through this. And the final segment of this session is to look at substitutes for plastic. So I shall talk for a little bit, and then we'll see if we have Tom, and if not, we'll go into our panel session. I mentioned OPRL exists to put the recycling labels on packaging here in the UK, which is all about engaging consumers as companies seek to actually increase the supply of recyclates in order to incorporate that within their packaging. It also has had an unexpected effect in that as we designate different materials as more or less recyclable based on local authority collections here, what we found is that companies have chosen to switch materials into the more recyclable options, partly because actually they want to show their customers how responsible they are, but also because that offers them greater options for the future. And we have just completed beta testing of a designing for recyclability tool to address the question that Joe posed of, well, actually, you've got to make sure that the materials choice and the way you design that packaging increases its chances of actually making it through the whole recycling process. So that's not just how you, what you make your bottle out of, but do you put, for example, a PVC sleeve around a PET bottle that then makes it less recognizable? How do you design the cap so that you capture the cap in the same way that we capture ring pulls on aluminium cans, for example, so that goes through the recycling system, doesn't just get lost. He also mentioned the We Recycle app that we launched as part of the Leads by Example campaign on Tuesday. It is up on the App Store. Unfortunately, you have to be standing in Leeds to really test out its full functions, because you scan your piece of packaging. If it's one of the 15 participating brands, it's concentrated on soft drinks initially. It will recognize that packaging, tell you whether it's recyclable or not, and then you can ask for information on your nearest recycling point whilst you're out on the go in Leeds city centre, because whilst curbside we've got more and more successful, and particularly I think on drinks bottles, it's about 74% recycled in the home. The difficult ones to capture now are those consumed on the go. And here in the UK, we are useless at having on-the-go infrastructure. Only 4 in 10 councils provide it. So we're hoping that the app will get over that issue of, well, I know in general you can do this, but where I am right now, what should I do? So, Melissa alluded to the need to look at the whole use of plastics, and I think I like to call it the resources hierarchy, because I don't like this word waste, needs to be re-looked at again in the context of plastics. So it's not just reduce, reuse, recycle, recover, but actually we start with replace, reduce, reuse, recycle, perhaps recompose, recover. And we need to take a holistic view of which material is the appropriate material to use within that. If you're looking at something that's reusable, then perhaps there are alternatives to plastic that are much easier to use within that system. Whereas, for example, a glass bottle going through the whole supply chain is much heavier and therefore can have a much higher environmental impact than its plastic alternative. Are there situations where you can use something that's completely novel? So we were talking before, and John mentioned, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, uho? Uhu. It's only got one O at the end, but it's still an U, which is plastic made out of seaweed and plant material, and you can eat it if you want. And that's being looked at as sort of little bubbles that you could use for drinks dispensing, for example. They're also looking at it for sauce sachets. The downside of that solution is it has a very short life. It breaks down quite quickly, so you have to package almost on site. But perhaps it has great potential. Melissa mentioned the takeaway culture in Asia. Well, it's well and truly here, particularly amongst younger consumers. So those sauces that you get with your takeaway meal perhaps could be packaged within that. Or within, say, a festival environment where you have the infrastructure to capture that sort of packaging. Bioplastics, I think, is quite a fraught area, and we use this term to actually refer to a whole range of products that are actually quite different. It could be plastics made from non-oil resources, for example, but they're still essentially the same plastic. Those of you who were around when biodiesels were supposed to be all the rage will remember the difficulties where that displaces food production or actually leads to more rainforest destruction in order to produce the feedstock for that. So we have to be careful in our choices. And compostables also talked about a lot. I characterise this as the Guardian reader's solution. Where I live in South London, 50% of my neighbours live in medium or high-rise flats. They don't have a garden, let alone a composting option. The way the collections are arranged, there is no way that they can put anything into a council collection system that would lead that packaging to get to the right process. So all it is a large risk of contaminating conventional plastics and preventing us from getting into proper recycling of those. So horses for courses, we always have to think about the circumstances within which these are used. And I think part of the issue is we think about the materials and the products instead of the consumer, because actually they need to be placed at the heart of this system. We hand this packaging over to consumers and then expect to get it all back magically and for them to understand what to do it. They are actually the weakest link within the circular economy. Our job is about helping brands to engage consumers in recapturing those resources and seeing them as valuable resources that we need to feed back into the economy. And whilst all of us in this room are passionate about this, I think John Debon speaking, Lord Debon, at the plastics debate at another conference, which I won't mention, pointed out that, you know, we're weird. Most people just don't think about packaging in this way. The only time they ever think about packaging is when they're faced with a disposal problem. And they want to make a decision in a split second. And we have to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. So yes, we need to have thought carefully about what the material is. Yes, we need to have designed it properly. But we also need to think about what's the convenient collection system that they are going to put that into. And very often that's going to be, can I just pop it into this bin in my kitchen or that bin? And maybe I'll think about having 2 separate bins in my bathroom as well, but that's about as complicated as they'll cope with. When we were researching how we went about doing this app and how we might engage consumers through it, what came back from the consumer insight work was money isn't the only motivation. People want to get a kind of feel good that they're doing the right thing. And that can be as simple as using the sort of Fitbit approach of just getting a well done, you've earned this badge because you've recycled enough, to light the street light outside of your house or power your local primary school. Some people just want a kind of to make it a game, to make it a competitive approach and be able to say that they've recycled more than their mates or their street's recycled more than the street next door. And we are trialling with Leeds Beckett University as part of the Leeds by Example initiative to see if we can get the different student societies to actually compete with each other with a little motivation for that society for the winning one. The other thing I think is we really need to think about a very clear strategy of where we're going on this. Here in the UK, there's a big debate about the extended producer responsibility, and we're expecting a consultation on that very shortly. The estimation is that the costs that producers will need to contribute will be, in order to sort of align with European thinking on this, will now need to cover 80 to 100% of the costs of packaging recovery. Currently, it's down at about 10% here in the UK. And that's estimated that around 800 million to £1 billion will need to be contributed by industry to ensure we have the right infrastructure, and hopefully infrastructure that means more packaging is recovered and recycled here within the UK. Estimates on how the deposit recovery scheme might work suggest that up to £1.5 billion will need to be invested in that. So that's more than a whole year for the whole of the rest of the infrastructure. And we need to make some rational decisions about, is that the best approach? Perhaps it is if it gets higher recovery rates and better quality of recovery. But we really need to think carefully about this. And the fact that if you work on the basis of the Scottish Government's recent consultation on this, they reckon unredeemed deposits, depending on which model you use, how big the incentive is, how good consumers are at responding, could have between £500 million and £2.5 billion of unredeemed deposits just in Scotland. If you think of that on a UK-wide scale, that's a huge amount of money that's sort of being taken out of the economy and sitting there, and what do we do with it? It might offset some of the costs of running DRS, but it's out of consumers' pockets. So we have a huge challenge ahead of us in terms of making the right choices. We've heard all through today's sessions about the need for collaboration, partnerships, industry-wide approaches, cross-sector approaches, but we mustn't forget the consumer and how they fit within this whole cycle as well. Now, I'm just going to check whether John is now with us. No, he's flying in. He's obviously having problems with the planes. So we will move to the panel session, and this is really hopefully driven by you and what thoughts have been provoked by what you've heard this morning. So we have a good range of questions here, which we will start out on. Melissa, could you explain further why you think that bioplastics are a false solution for businesses using plastic packaging? Hot topic.
Yeah, reading from the number, the 9 people are supporting this question. I'm happy to share some of my understanding on this topic. And as Jane has just said, bioplastics kind of a loose definition of a whole group of different plastic products. And I will focus on 2 groups. The first one is bio-based, and I think Jane has already given a very good clarification about the problem of the bio-based plastics, particularly the implication on the land use. And we know the food crisis, and we just don't need to have more land to be prioritized for issues that could be resolved in other ways, rather than to giving them for proper food production and delivery. And so I won't elaborate on that. And the second point would be the biodegradable plastics. I think this is one of the major categories in bioplastics. So biodegradability doesn't necessarily mean it will be biodegraded. So there's an industry condition required to classify if it's biodegradable or not. It's being set in standards like EN 113432 and 14995. And all those industrial conditions for biodegradability could not be often met in natural environment. Those for rapid biodegradation rarely occur, like some of the requirement is prolonged temperature over 50 degrees. It's very hard to achieve this in the UK at least, although we had a warm summer this year. And secondly, even though there's a most optimistic time frame, once the biodegradable plastic get into environment, for example, the marine environment, it could still cause a lot of death injury to marine species. In one of the study, once the sea turtle ate a biodegradable plastics, the polymer mass of it decreased only by 4 to 8% over 49 days. So there's not much biodegradation as being expected from its name, biodegradable plastics. And thirdly, a lot of the biodegradation condition is anaerobic in landfill, which means it will release a huge amount of greenhouse gases. And fourthly, we will need a lot of recycling applications like sorting and separation technologies. Do we really want to invest our limited resources into this channel compared to a lot of other options we have at hand? And fourthly, there could easily be contamination of recycled plastics with biodegradable plastics, which make the quality of recycled plastics mixture unpredictable and might not be possible for reuse for long-term purposes, for example, used in construction material. And lastly, there have been evidence that once the plastic has been marked as or labeled as biodegradable, people will have greater inclination to litter and to buy and to use. So I think there's a lot of questions I posed here, and I think it would be good to have some discussion about it. Thank you.
So I'd be interested to hear from our other panelists about how that would fit with their business models and how it would impact, for example, Joe, on your aspiration to get to 50% rPET in your bottles.
So I completely agree on the biodegradable piece. I mean, I just think it's fraught with difficulty, and I don't think we want to try and move to biodegradable bottles because it will contaminate the stream that we're trying to fix. So I completely agree with that piece. I've followed the debate on bioplastic for a long time, and we were the first business to use plant-based material not conflicting with food, coming from sugarcane bagasse, and making sure that that sugarcane could then be turned into bioethanol, be turned into part of the PET component. And you know, we spent a number of years being told that was the future, backed by NGOs saying it's the right solution. And now we've got to a position where people are saying, well, maybe it's not the right solution. So I do get a little bit confused. And I have to say, I'm not convinced. I think that if we could get to a place where we are replacing fossil fuel-based material with plant-based material that does not conflict with food and is 100% recyclable and doesn't in any way contaminate, then I'm not quite sure what the challenge is. And so I really urge us, as we look for solutions, not to just write off the use of bioplastics and the likes of plant bottle overnight because we don't think it's quite right. I really think that's we've got to be very, very careful not just to confine something to the dustbin of history because we're not sure it's right. I think it could be right. At the moment, the challenge with bioplastics and the plant bottle supply chain is, frankly, it's still more expensive. But I do think that it's a really quite difficult mixed message to say, yeah, we support, no, we don't support. And I think people are now kind of scrambling, thinking, is bioplastic, is plant bottle the right thing? Again, I was in Norway yesterday, and I saw packaging solution after packaging solution after packaging solution, which was all about using bio-based material to replace fossil fuel-based material in the kind of the plastic food trays that you were referring to. The key is making sure that it's recyclable. That's absolutely key. Let's not put it into a material if that material cannot be collected and recycled. So I just urge real caution on that one.
Thank you. So, Risto, in terms of your processes, what kind of challenges would the wrong sort of bioplastic give you?
Okay, how I see, I mean, it's a good point here about this designing the packaging correctly so that it's really recyclable, mechanical, and also chemically, because there are some certain plastics that also for the chemical recycling makes some challenges. For example, the chlorine in PVDC or PVC is a big issue if you have that kind of streams coming into the recycling streams. Yeah. So, for example, that kind of things. But in generic, I don't see any, from our point, any issues having, for example, bio-based, because bio-based at drop-in, it can be also, I mean, the same plastics as we are today in polypropylene or polyethylene, for example. And if it's biodegradable plastics, also that can be handled in the chemical recycling. I don't see any bigger problems in that. And I agree with the previous speakers here and regarding bioplastics in general. I don't see that kind of a black and white fight there between, because I see also for the biodegradable applications where it makes sense. For example, you are collecting organic waste in some countries where you need some kind of a collection system for the organic waste, some bags, paper or plastic. And in that kind of applications, it makes sense. And also, for example, mulch film, where you are using a lot of polyethylene film on the fields. So, and it's very difficult to collect that back into recycling. So in that kind of applications, you can, I see a good potential to use biodegradable plastics, for example. And then one point regarding this separation of technology, that we have some issues regarding that we would like to have just one single polymer in the loop. Yeah, that would be the optimal solution. Yeah. But I don't see that really coming. So we will have a number of plastics there in the circulation, and the question is that I see also into the future that we will have more efficient system, to collect and separate in the future. So that will develop in the future. So in, for example, 5-10 years, we are having a completely different kind of setup for the recycling streams. So I don't see that big issue there. It's any big issue today, but not in the future.
So that simplification of polymer choices approach is something that the Plastics Pact here in the UK is very definitely looking at, and is the reason why we've held off revising our guidelines just yet, because we want to take account of that in that. Just thinking about, John, how you harvest plastic, marine plastic, and there must be a huge sorting job involved in that. Would bioplastics complicate that?
I mean, one thing we focus on is turning off the tap to make sure there's no more plastic in the ocean. So the fish nets we get are ones that will be headed that way, but we're not like buoy and slat. We're not going out to take it back. That's a whole other set of questions for later in this discussion. On the bioplastic side, we're very much, the door is open. And I love the challenges that are coming from NGOs and scientists, and I think it's really important. But I agree with Joe that, in the future, there is an opportunity, and we should, as innovators, look to the potential, but be challenged on making sure systemically it makes sense. I mean, one part for us with networks is there's an opportunity for seaweed to become a bioplastic. Therefore, there's an opportunity to empower communities and make them suppliers of a material in a way that isn't that, working with ZSL, it's still going to be fine in terms of maintaining the balance of the ecosystem, but it's going to be a commodity that they could sell to food companies, cosmetics companies, and to potentially us. I mean, our own history with bioplastics is that we worked with a nylon 610 for one of our products, which was formed from oil that came from crushed castor beans, which was also a project we ran where we were able to let smallholder farmers in India grow a crop that didn't need a lot of water, but could provide value to them. So I think bioplastics is a really tough issue. I think even more so in packaging than, say, in the built environment. But I never like closing the doors. I never like saying don't, or, I kind of want to say, well, what is the right decision at the right time? And to kind of fuel the discussion here, what I would like to see is a bit more of a roadmap, a kind of a more open discussion in certain forums about, well, what's possible by 2025, 2035. It'll be moving goalposts all the time, but I would love to be a bit more open. And I think with the collaborative forums such as the Plastic Pact, Next Wave, and others, the players are there to make that happen.
So we need to make some wise choices. We use this term bioplastics too loosely. We need to understand which type of bioplastic and in what circumstances we're working. But using byproducts that don't currently have a home could actually be a very good way of capturing unused resources.
May I add something?
Yeah, please do.
So I think the real danger here is the whole plastic industry, or a large portion of industry, thinks that bio-based plastics is the right way forward. So we have seen the data of the current demand and expected demand, expected production volume. So there's the land use cannot be sustainably met for the current and expected growing demand for plastics, particularly when we take bioenergy into consideration as well. So like all different sectors are competing against forest, against agriculture, against peatland for those precious land areas. So I think we need to be very cautious if we really make it into the strategy that this is the right way forward.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So next up, Joe, your company is aiming at 100% collection of packaging in Western Europe. What about collection in Asia, where sorting facilities are often non-existent? And I think this fits very nicely within the overall context. You know, those of us who are very concerned about the amount of plastic in the ocean, yes, we have things to address here in the West, but by goodness, we've got more to address in other markets.
Yeah, and look, completely agree. That's, you know, it's almost privileged to be having the discussion in the UK on how we get plastic bottle recycling up from whether it's 56 or 74%, depending on what set of statistics you believe, all the way to 100. And we're privileged because although on my walk to the tube, people have clearly dropped litter, we're privileged because we've got all of us recycling facilities in this country, whether it's in our kitchen or whether it's at our curbside, or so we understand that. Look, that is why at a global level the Coca-Cola Company has set the World Without Waste vision, which is to drive that demand for getting certainly PET plastic bottles back. And that really does one thing. It drives engagement at a local level. So you set the vision, getting 100% of our plastic bottles back, or not just plastic bottles, but collecting a bottle or can for every one we sell across the entire world by 2030. Frankly, we don't know if it's achievable. It might be, I mean, we know it's an incredible challenge, but what it does do is that it sets and starts the conversation, not just in GB, in Norway, in Amsterdam. It's pretty easy there, but it sets that conversation going at a local level. And yet there are a number of countries in which we operate where waste infrastructure is either incredibly poor or non-existent. And yet we also know that we've got a role to play, again, cannot act alone, but a role to play in helping local municipalities, local authorities, governments, policymakers to get a lot better. But what are they going to get a lot better at? It's about capturing the value of that waste. Because it's about making sure that the waste that's there, the value can be captured. That at a local level, yes, there must be waste streams, but then what happens to that waste stream? At the moment, you could look at a number of different countries and say, well, it's not being captured, it's going into, whether it's litter or oceans or rivers, and we look at that and we know that's not right. So we know the size and the scale of the challenge, but we also know that we as Coke are not going to fix that. Coke are not going to fix the waste recycling infrastructure of any developing country. I mentioned before the World Economic Forum's Global Plastic Action Partnership. It's a start. It will fast-track circular economy solutions in developing countries. First projects will be in Indonesia, a country which is battling with a multitude of issues, waste of which is just one. So look, it doesn't change overnight. It doesn't get fixed overnight, but we want to be part of that solution. We want to be able to get that value that we all know is there in that waste, in that waste infrastructure. So it's about capturing value, but to do that, that's exactly why we've set the 2030 goal. And those discussions, those local engagement pieces are happening now. They're starting now.
So that's a bold ambition from a global brand, iconic brand. But we've heard earlier about the need for cross-brand, cross-industry partnerships on this. John, in terms of the sort of partnerships you've been involved in, how do you, A, get the message to the people who bring the plastic to you and avoid it becoming pollution, but also then to create that market, if you like, to use what they bring, to put the value into that whole equation?
In terms of the people that are going to bring the waste to us, with Next Wave, it's about what can we do as companies to strengthen that supply chain. I think one thing I think we'll be looking in the future is looking at bringing in more processors, bringing in more of the widening it, because not every company can go and set up their own supply chain. That's not necessarily practical. What we can do as manufacturers is make sure that we design products that do incorporate plastic recycled, high levels of recycled content, and ideally high levels of content that would otherwise be waste. Let's turn that waste into opportunity. If we can grow that demand, and I think packaging, there's no shortage of demand coming from the public. Perhaps in the built environment, if I think about how much our customers, whether they're banks or schools or universities, are asking for recycled content, that's something we need to make sure that we're pushing. We're highlighting what we're doing, and we're pushing to grow that demand, and we're pushing for regulation and legislation to promote that. And that's if you think about your sphere of influence as a manufacturer, you've got influence over your customers, you've got influence over your supply chain. You have a much stronger sphere of influence than perhaps you think you do, and we have to use that to tackle this.
So the competitive market can actually erode the base for this, and we need to find ways of either collaboration voluntarily or coercion from government.
Competition's an interesting one, because I think if we make a move, our competitors make a move. And let's have a race to the top, and let's avoid, as you say, that risk of a race to the bottom.
Yeah, okay. So let's have a look at, so I think there's one for Risto here. How many times can a recycling material go through the recycling loop? Is the material still suitable for uses such as food packaging?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, regarding if you think about with mechanical recycling, you are facing that issue that you are not able to create any ever-ending loop, just to recycle it all the time, back and forth, because the material or the plastic is every time you are heating it up and processing it, it's breaking down a bit. So at the end, you will not just have monomers left, actually. So, and I cannot give any exact answer to, because it depends very much what polymer you refer to and what is the process you utilize there. So but anyway, it's anyway never-ending loop. So you need to go, if you think about recycling, you need to go via at some point with the chemical recycling, or you need to have a fresh feed. Either you use crude oil to have more new plastic there, or you use recycled chemical recycled streams back, or biomass-based polymers. So those you have basically the alternatives how to tackle this.
So we'll never get to a completely closed loop of just using the same material
No,
round and round again?
I don't believe that. So you need all these alternatives, and then coming back to this, I agree fully with them here with that we don't have the biomass to replace, I mean, with the bio-based polymers or the fossil-based polymers, like we are doing it today with this kind of recycling level. So the point is that we need to increase our recycling level with all the means what we have in our hands now in future, but we will always need some fresh feed in this. And then the question is what kind of feedstock we use for that leakage, what is leaking out from the loop. Are we using the crude oil, or are we using the biomass? And we don't need that much biomass as we are using, I mean, today as a feedstock for the polymers.
So I think that really re-emphasises Melissa's point that actually we have to reduce our reliance on plastics as well as making better use of the plastics that we have. Delighted that Tom's joined us now, and I guess you've had a bit of a nightmare this morning, so yes. Great to have you with us. So I think it would be, now that you've had a little chance to catch your breath, great to hear your presentation to add into the debate. So,
okay, yeah, I'll try to be quick then anyhow, to make sure there's enough room for debate. So yeah, Ecover, I'm head of long-term innovation for Ecover. Ecover started about 40 years ago out of a concern of impact of everyday products on the aquatic life, on water, which at that time was mainly the chemicals, because our products by definition will go down the drain. So once you use them, they go down the drain. So we had to kind of take that into account when designing a product. You don't only need to design it to wash your clothes, you need to design it to go down the drain. So hence we started to look into new chemistry, new ways of developing chemistry, which was fully biodegradable and no harm. Now, over the years, of course, the packaging topic came up, and of course we kind of looked at packaging as, okay, packaging is something going to technical cycle, so to be recycled. We always made our packaging to be perfectly recyclable, so no coloring, transparent bottles, no multi-layers, we never used those. Until indeed we kind of start seeing the effect still of plastic that was having on the environment. And actually, the discussion was not anymore about the chemicals entering the water, it was about the plastic entering the water. So we started a journey on packaging. It started way back as well. We started already 20 years ago with refill packaging, so you can bring back a bottle to the store and refill it. But it was always very small, it was the small health food shops. We introduced bioplastics, biopolymers, which were still recyclable. We introduced recycled content. And over the last kind of few years, we ramped up our whole packaging strategy, starting with the ocean bottle, where we collected plastic from the ocean, making our first ocean bottle, which then led to a lot of collaboration with the recyclers, which then led to our commitments that you see there above, that by, in the end, to make it short, by 2020, we don't want to use any virgin plastic anymore in our products. So neither the bottles, neither the caps, neither the labels. But that is the below point, though, is then also talking about alternative biodegradable materials. And once I mention that, then the whole debate starts, like whether that's a good alternative or not, which is always a controversial thing. Now, in our point of view, and I think it just came, and I was lucky to kind of catch that discussion that came up here. Recycling, indeed, is not an endless loop. And my biggest fear of all is when I look at recycling, when I look at plastic production, which is going to peak over the next coming 10, 20 years, like we see with every kind of environmental impact. Even if we kind of double recycling rates, what we see now, the rate of plastic entering the ocean will still be a lot more than we know today. So I think absolutely it's crucial to work on alternatives beyond recycling. We do believe recycling is part of the solution. Hence, I mean, we kind of made that commitment to use fully recycled content in all our bottles, all our caps. We are almost ready, but we want to go beyond that. And new materials, biodegradable materials, is for me part of the solution, although they don't fit in the current systems, and that's the issue today. And that's where you get the pushback. Biodegradable materials don't fit the current system, so hence we need to ban them. We don't need to allow them. That's what I hear most often in those type of debates. While I think we need to rethink the system, and we need to think of materials that are benign wherever they end up. So they can be recycled when you want to, they can be composted when you want to, they can, if they disappear as litter, which we never want, but if they disappear as litter, they have no harm. And often people again say whether that's possible or not. I think with the new biotechnology that we see happening with all the new startups, I think that is possible. And we will have a prototype of this type of material in a bottle format by 2020. We have the first bottles made, just a few hundred. So now the issue will be the scale up, but we're getting there. And then this will go hand in hand with a radical reduction, because again, I don't believe there's enough biomass available to cover the current growth in plastic. So we need to think of radical reduction, which refill to me is a really crucial one for us. And we, like I said, we had refill over the years. We want to make it big. We want to scale it. We want to get it into mass market. So we're going to have, by beginning next year, we're going to have the first big refill machine in a retailer in UK. We'll start the first tests. We're going to develop durables, which are made from materials like metal, like glass, that can be recycled in an endless loop. And really start testing refill in a big way. This changes the whole supply chain. That's for me the interesting thing. You can ship bulk containers of 1,000-liter concentrated bulk containers to the store, connected to the machine. The machine fills the consumer packaging in the store. We made it leak-free. You can add customization to the refill. So the whole supply chain changes from filling bottles in all different variants and fragrances and volumes to shipping 1,000-liter concentrated, which to me also, except for saving a lot of packaging, could save a lot of energy and complexity in your supply chain, so hence cost, which then to me is then the most interesting model to look for.
Thank you very much. So I think that echoes things that we've heard from other presentations in different ways. Joe, you've had this experiment in Reading in terms of refills. What have your experiences been with that?
Well, I think we found it a really interesting trial. We've taken it to 2 music festivals this summer. I mean, essentially, it is, just to give a bit more colour on what it is, it's, if you're familiar with our kind of old fountain business or our freestyle business, where you can kind of select the drinks that you want. I mean, it's essentially that kind of equipment, but enabled with providing the consumer an RFID-enabled refillable plastic container. You buy the container, you either buy it outright with a certain number of uses, or or you buy 20 uses of it, and essentially you can refill it again and again. We've learned a lot from it. I mean, first of all, it works. Second of all, I think we learned that we've got to get the consumer communication absolutely right. I think we can do a lot better at that. We are looking at trying to answer the old question of, well, tell me about the life cycle analysis. So look at the life cycle analysis of that versus all of the other packaging formats. So we're doing that. I think it's got huge potential. I think that consumers are looking for different solutions. I think it is absolutely right that we're trialing them, that we're testing them, and I think you'll see more from us going forward on that. So it's a great first start. But don't forget it's not right for every single place and occasion. There will be occasions where resealable, lightweight PET packaging might still be the preferred pack. But at the same time, glass might be the right pack for other different occasions. Cans offer a great solution as well. So it's absolutely right for our business that we look across the different packaging mix. And as I said right at the beginning, about 30% of the packaging we use is PET packaging as it stands today in Western Europe. But we've learned a lot from the Reading trial. We're looking forward to doing more.
Yeah, I think it is very much about how do you engage consumers in behaving in a different way, and that's going to be one of our big challenges. It's not just about re-engineering the processes the consumer doesn't see, it's how we pull them into those new processes.
I mean, just while I've got, I do want to come back to one thing you said earlier, Jane, which is the consumer is the weakest link. I'm not sure I agree with that, because I actually think that the weakest link is the waste infrastructures that we've got that are not working. I think the consumer is ready to do the right thing, but we're not making it as easy as we can. You know, I go back to my walk from my house to the tube. Yes, some people you could say are lazy. They don't understand. They want a litter. They don't understand the value. But actually, the walk from my house to the tube, there's no bin to put the litter in, and I think I don't think it's right in some ways to say, well, consumers are the weakest thing. We've got to make it easy for consumers to do the right thing. I don't see evidence of consumers saying, well, I'm ready to drop the bottle because I actually just don't care. Well, maybe there are a few who just don't care. But actually, we've got to make it easy. We've got to communicate the value of that material, which is partly where the deposit return scheme piece comes in. And we've got to also demystify this recycling thing. You know, even in the UK, people just don't believe that the pack gets collected and then it gets reprocessed and broken down and it can be a new valuable secondary material and go for secondary use. People just don't understand that kind of, it's not an infrastructure, but that process is difficult. People don't understand it. We've got to demystify it. We've got to talk about it. We've got to break that kind of fragile economics that I referred to, which means that so often it just doesn't work. And I think that's why we're putting investment into above the line consumer communication. Say, look, this is why you've got to recycle it. I'll just say one other thing. You know, we've got on all of our packs and all of our ads now a little tag at the end which says this pack is 100% recyclable. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, of course it's 100% recyclable. It's a plastic bottle. We all know that. But the reason we put that tagline on our packs and on our bottles is that our consumer research said that people don't understand that our packaging is 100% recyclable because they're confused. So I think we've got to, if the consumer is the weakest link, which I'm not sure I agree with, we've just got to make it much, much simpler. And I'm hugely passionate about that piece. Make it simpler, put the infrastructure in place, and demystify this kind of recycling thing. I love the Leads by Example trial, which is trying to do that. Have a look, Google it if anyone's looking for more on that. It's a great way of demystifying and making on-the-go recycling very, very simple. Hubbub are behind that. Brilliant initiative.
Absolutely, and I think I deliberately provoke people over the consumer issue, but because actually they often just don't get mentioned in these discussions, and having spent a day walking around with various bits of packaging in my handbag because I couldn't find anywhere to put it whilst I was out and about, I identify with that. Just coming back, Tom, to that issue of having obvious and easy collection systems for biodegradable plastics, that would solve the problem for consumers. Risto mentioned that if you have proper food waste collection systems, then there's an option there. Around half of councils in the UK currently collect food waste separately. That goes to anaerobic digestion, and the first thing the AD plants do is rake out any plastic they see in it because they think it's a contaminant. How do we get to a situation where that infrastructure can work properly?
Yeah, because that's indeed because people judge the biodegradables by what's currently available, which is mainly PLA, which is indeed not biodegradable in many conditions, which is mostly a pollutant in the current stream. Now, again, we need to get away from that idea that biodegradables are PLA and that's the only option. There are materials, there are new polymers which are biodegradable in way more and in different conditions, which are perfectly compostable together with food waste, if that's what you want to do with them, but eventually could be recycled. So there's many myths about biodegradables and what they can do and can't do, which is the first thing we need to get over. Get away from fixing your thinking about biodegradables as being PLA and all the problems related to PLA. And then secondly, another big pushback is always that if you make stuff biodegradable, you give people the message that they should just throw it away on the street or wherever. I think littering is a behavior that's not related to the material. It's a cultural, educational thing which people need to be brought up with. Doesn't have to do anything with the material. Even if people don't like litter, whatever material it is that's lying on the street, but they will never like it. So I think that's again for me not the right argument to ban. But then indeed it's all about the infrastructure. How do you get to the chicken and the egg problem? How do you get to collection? Because there's currently not enough volume to organize collection. So there's no demand, so the people working on the materials, they don't have a market. And I don't know how to get to this breakthrough. I think there we need to get to a certain level of scale. So we'll need to find like-minded people that work on it together until we can reach a certain scale that we can allow also a certain communication, mass communication. And then do it. So we will never put this material on the market if we would be the only ones using it, because that would be a bad idea.
Yeah, thank you. So it comes back, we keep hearing, we have to move forward together on this. A question here for Melissa. Are there any examples you know about engaging the financial industry on plastic-free investments, similar to the deforestation-free policies?
I really like this question. Although I don't have any background in finance at all. And I'm not quite sure if I understand the deforestation-free policy correctly. I know some of the financial institutions have claimed that they won't invest in any fossil fuel projects, maybe something similar like that. And for plastics, I'm not aware of that, but at the moment I'm steering one of a major UN report of the Global Chemical Outlook 2, and I raised this issue to the authors and the whole steering committee. I said, for any of the change in the industry, we need the financial and cash flows, we need the resources, but it hasn't been taken into consideration into any policy discussions or multi-stakeholder engagement at all. And yesterday, there was a task force on climate-related financial disclosure organizations speaking next door. And it's a group of financial institutions trying to work out better how the financial industry could work on the climate change area. I personally believe there's a huge role for the financial industry to play regarding the plastics or more broadly the pollutions. However, I don't know, I'm just asking if there's anybody in this room working in the financial industry that might propose any of the idea, because climate change only get onto the agenda of the financial industries, maybe in the recent years, although the scientists have found the climate risk for a long time. So I think it's a similar case for plastics here. Now it's a hot topic within the value chain, within the general customers, within even the policy decision makers. But is it on the agenda of the financial industry? I don't have this answer, and I really, really like if somebody could come up and talk to me and find out if there is a way forward to better engage this industry. And taking the chance of speaking, I have like 2-3 points to add. And the first one is to respond to what Joe has said. I think I agree, there's a great role for enhancing and supporting and enabling customers or general publics with more options to dealing with the problem. As I said in my presentation, we could have more facilities for better waste collection and sorting out, and we could have more like refilling practices or initiatives that has been tried out in different universities, at least so far. And for the recycling industry, I have a friend working in the UK in the recycling industry, and he told me how the recycling industry got their profit from 2 ways. The first one is from collecting the recycled waste. A second way is to selling it out to foreign countries like China. So regarding the waste facility capacity, I don't know if even the developed countries could develop the full capacity to deal with their own waste before they talk about we would like to help the developing countries to enhance such capacity. That doesn't sound very logical to me if we in developed countries cannot solve it ourselves. So this is one point that I really want to remind people. And one last question is is on the chemical recycling. It's a question from one of my NGO colleagues based in Indonesia. So there's a pilot project designed by Unilever trying to convert plastic sachet into polymers. But for the pilot in 2017, not soon after it started, the pilot failed, and there's a huge explosion. So the whole system was shut and sent to redesign, but even so far, there's no reason coming out from the facility runner or Unilever, like, what's the reason? And at the same time, there's the data like 40% of filtered waste has mixture of hazardous chemicals in it, and there's no way to deal with it. And even the local Ministry of Environment said they have never been invited to the environment impact assessment study meeting or visiting the site for this facility. So it now has raised a lot of concern and uncertainties among governments, among public, among NGOs. So I'm really hope to see like if there's any experience could be shared from our peer panelists here. Thank you.
Thanks. So we're coming towards the end of our time now, so we'll try and get another couple of questions in. We've already touched on the fact that perhaps there are just too many polymer choices out there and we need to simplify what we do, and it's easier to build the infrastructure around that. And certainly within the UK, absolutely, we export our problem by and large. And hope other people sort it out for us. And steadily, Southeast Asia, one country by another, is telling us in turn that they don't want our waste. So we need to think about how we develop the infrastructure here. Plastic Pact is very much looking at this as an issue. So perhaps Joe and Risto, you could give us your views on how fast we can simplify that and build the infrastructure locally to cope with it.
I think this goes back to the discussion around the difference between problematic and unnecessary single-use packaging and packaging that can be collected. widely collected. We've got the systems there and can be kind of closed loop bottle to bottle. I think that's a hugely important discussion. I know that the UK Plastics Pact is right in the weeds of that discussion now. And I saw on one of your slides, I think you mentioned this piece around the hierarchy of single-use packaging. I think that is absolutely key, because there clearly are some items that are single-use packaging that they're never going to be collected, are never going to be recycled. There's never going to be a stream for them, and clearly fit into that problematic and unnecessary category. And I think it's really important that the Plastics Pact looks at that. I think that the piece that we've really got to focus on is this piece around waste, and your point around let's keep waste as domestic waste. I couldn't agree with more. I mean, in the UK, the reason that we've been exporting waste, particularly plastic waste, to China is frankly because our PRN system is fundamentally flawed and broken, needs urgent and fundamental reform to incentivize waste collection in this country to work and to back up the economics of that. I mean, I've been working in this sector for over a decade. I've watched plastics reprocessing and recycling facilities go bust one after the other. We've been, as Coca-Cola, we've been at times the only company buying the output from companies like Ecoplastics, and they've been on a kind of a financial knife edge. Now maybe it's a bit more on vogue, but and companies are coming in and saying, well, we want more recycled plastic. But with the lower price of oil, it's been really fragile in terms of the economics. So we've got to make that work better. We've got to do better. Keep waste as domestic waste and realise the value out of it. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with the bottle-to-bottle closed-loop recycling piece. It means getting recyclability absolutely right. It means maximising the amount of material that can come back, but it also means getting collection right. And again, we talk about Southeast Asia being clearly incredibly difficult, but let's start closer to home as well, because we've got 400 plus different recycling systems in this country, and it's absolutely nuts, and it doesn't help. So if we can't get it right, then we're not going to be able to put ourselves up as an example to others. That's why I love going to Norway, because it's so simple. No one drops litter in Norway because they really get the value of that waste. And every single plastic bottle with its closure on gets put into the deposit return scheme, and the value comes back, and it's a true closed loop bottle-to-bottle system, and it works.
Yeah. So one of the complications we face on our label, which is really about, we've dropped putting the material on the label because we found it was confusing for consumers to have a label that might have a piece of packaging with 3 components, all plastic. One is widely recycled, one you might be able to, you need to check locally, and one isn't plastic. And to most consumers, plastic is plastic is plastic. So actually narrowing down so that at least the choice is you can or you can't, not maybe, but narrowing polymers would help that. Risto, in terms of your feedstock, how would that impact on you, having 3 polymers instead of goodness knows how many?
Okay, it would be much easier, and I think it would also be easier for the mechanical recycling and that part. And okay, just one comment regarding this exported waste. Yeah, that's taking place in all the European countries. I think also in Finland, but in a smaller volume. And the issue I think there is that I mean the earning models for the recyclers has been that weak. Yeah? So I mean, because we as a consumers, we have basically, how I see it, we have just paid for. I mean, when we are buying the plastic products, we have been just paying the price for putting that as a landfill somewhere. And we have not paid the price for really to recycle the material back. So, and the question is, where do we place this kind of extra cost? Where in the value chain? And that's the tricky thing. I mean, if you're putting the taxation, okay, the governments are collecting the money, but are they bringing it back into I mean, building up the infrastructure for the recycling or using it for some other uses? So that's one thing what we have to consider, that we have a real cost for the products we are buying, including the plastics. That's one point. And yeah, and okay, regarding mechanical recycling, it's very much about downcycling in many cases, and that's the tricky thing, that you are not able to make the same product. Okay, in the bottle case, you are been achieving to make it to some extent, but in many cases you are not able to use the plastic back into the same product, like in packaging in general, for a number of reasons. You have the contaminants, I mean, you have the strict regulation about migration into the food and so on.
Mm. Absolutely, and yet food quality packaging is a whole issue in itself. Possibly doesn't impact on detergents in quite the same way, Tom.
No, although we were buying food grade plastic as well, just to avoid any contamination risks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we could probably go on all day, but we do need to let people get to their coffee. An excellent discussion, excellent speakers. I think for me, the themes that come through this is we need to move forward together with a collective vision on systemic change. No single brand or even packaging manufacturer can do that on their own. And therefore, we do have to have collaborations. And actually, because in many ways we're looking for global solutions, even national collaborative actions aren't going to be sufficient, because our global system means that we are manufacturing, recycling, whatever, in all different parts of the globe, and we need to bring that together. And we need to have very clear communications to all the stakeholders through that circle, especially consumers, on what those choices mean and why it's important to make these shifts. And if you're as old as I am, you can moan on about the state of litter on our streets, and it wasn't like this when I was a girl. But actually, we do need to get back to not having people walk away from pop festivals leaving their tents behind that they've used once. I mean, that whole single use and dispose mentality needs to shift back to a far more, we all need to be resource miners and recoverers. So an excellent panel, excellent discussion, some really stimulating questions. Sorry if we didn't get to your question, but hopefully we covered off the ones that were burning in your minds in the room. Thank you all very much, and thanks to our panel.